Hello and welcome to When They Popped. I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Mary, and today we're having an emergency episode of When They Popped. We're coming to you fairly unedited and recorded literally on April 15th in response to the just-released documentary, The Carters Hurts to Love You. Directed by Soleil Moon Frye, this documentary gives viewers unprecedented access to the Carter family story through Angel Carter's perspective. As Aaron's twin sister, Angel bravely unpacks the complicated family dynamics that led to the tragic death of 3 of the 5 Carter siblings and their father. Her courage in sharing this deeply personal journey is both remarkable and important. Now, reminder, full disclaimer, this is a pretty unedited conversation. We literally just watched this today, so hop on this gripping roller coaster ride with us. Let's dive into part 1.
So right off the bat, we know that this is going to be sort of from Angel's point of view. And I think we saw a lot of that in the trailer and in a lot of the coverage that preceded the drop. And the documentary opens with this voiceover from Angel. And it's worth noting that she herself has done so much to support mental health, particularly in children. And I feel like overall, throughout the process of this documentary, we get sort of an unprecedented access into what it was like growing up in this very famous family. And we start off, it hits you right in the feels. There's this really sweet montage of Nick and Aaron on stage and Nick's journey to fame with Backstreet Boys, because that's really where everything began. It started with Nick.
Those clips, that montage was really cool to see because I saw some clips of Nick, the Carters, the Backstreet Boys even that we have never, seen before. And we get kind of this flash forward to, recently when Nick and Angel are sitting down talking and Nick goes, "Fame and money destroyed our family." And that's kind of, I think, the thesis of this series. And it seems to come back to this a lot. Angel is doing her interview and she's asked to describe their childhood. And she's like, it can't be put into one word. And she starts off describing it as sadness, fear, but also with love and hope. And that's just sad. You never want to hear someone's childhood described with sadness and fear. She talked about the family. She and Aaron are obviously twins, but she's technically 1 minute older than Aaron. And I think that was something she kind of carried with her. She was always looking out for him. She said she was the older twin, technically. And she reminded us that she was 4 years old when Nick was entering, BSB world, BSB mania, aka Nick was 12. And whenever I hear that, that blows my mind. It's just like a 12-year-old in showbiz. Insane. But to Angel, it really wasn't that insane. She's like, that's what I grew up knowing. That's all I really knew. That was my normal. And she also told us that her and Aaron were a surprise. They were not a planned pregnancy, let alone twins. So I think that kind of comes into play later when we get some more of Angel's story. But so we have the 5 Carters. We have Nick, BJ, Leslie, and then the twins, Aaron and Angel.
It's like actually crazy when they're showing these photos of their parents younger, how much Nick looks like just like his dad. Like when his dad is younger,
Yeah.
I was like, holy crap, that's like exactly what Nick looks like now. It's crazy. And Aaron, he had the same sweet little face since he was like 3 years old.
I know. It's like you can see him so much in his baby pictures, and you can see him in his son, too. It's quite remarkable. Angel tells us more a bit about the Carter siblings. BJ, she was the second oldest. She was very maternal. She took care of everyone. She described Nick as a protective older brother. And Angel described Aaron as the happy baby. He was a people pleaser, always smiling, always happy. And she uses the phrase people pleaser to describe him quite a lot in this documentary, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, just like so desperate for approval, for love, wanting to make people happy. There's this one home video that was very striking to me where Aaron's like crying. He's like on the floor, like getting his diaper changed or something. And he immediately stops crying when he sees the camera. And he's just like a born performer, as Angel will later attest in the doc.
That was so cute. And Angel basically described herself as she was kind of an observer. She just took in everything, all the chaos that was going on around her.
The amount of home footage that they included in here was like kind of amazing. There was so much. And it was very sweet to see them all together. There was this one scene where they're all like screaming in the tub, like all 5 of them together in there. But it almost sounded like they were like harmonizing, like their own little band. It was really sweet.
Sweet chaos, so it seemed. And per Angel, Jane Carter, their mother, she says she tried her best. She tried to be, loving to them when they were children. Bob Carter, on the other hand, according to Angel, was not as loving or sensitive or, fatherly towards his children unless he was drinking. Again, another common theme that we're going to see in this documentary. Apparently, Jane discovered Nick had some singing abilities. He was singing on a tree stump in their backyard. And we get some great footage of Nick in vocal lessons when he's, very young, and he's wearing this like cute little collared shirt. Like, it was very precious seeing that.
Oh my God, I was dying at the footage of him like performing. It was like an Elvis song, and he's wearing like silver pants, like this bodysuit in one. And then there's another clip where he's wearing this like gold outfit, and he's just like dancing like crazy. And he's just this little kid. It really is amazing, like how good he was from such a young age.
Yeah. And then we get some footage from 1992. Kelsey and I, we were 1 year old from this footage, which is crazy. And it seemed to be from when the Backstreet Boys were being formed, or very early days. And we see Nick with AJ and Howie, and he just looks so little and young compared to them, honestly, because he was so young.
We really see here this like dynamic between, like, I think a lot of the guys, when Aaron passed, they came out and they were like, he was like our little brother, because Nick was like the little brother of the group. And a lot of them refer to Nick as like their little brother. And it just, we really see that here. Like, he is a literal child in a boy band. Like, it's actually crazy. And Angel says that Backstreet Boys really started taking off when Nick was 14. Like, 14? Are you kidding me? What does that do to your development? Like, it's just crazy.
To be the breadwinner of the family at 14, you've got to wonder the impact that has on someone. But this documentary has a few famous faces pop up. And the first one we get is Melissa Joan Hart. And she reflects how Backstreet Boys appeared in Sabrina the Teenage Witch. They did an appearance, and then she kind of ran into them again in Australia. She was there and they were, touring or something. And she said it was literally, it seemed bigger than Beatlemania. And we've heard that all before in all the million of documentaries we've seen about the boys, how crazy it was. But I do want to note, it made more sense to me as the documentary went on. But at this point, I found her role in this show like kind of random. I was like, what is Melissa Joan Hart doing here?
I feel like they included her because she has that unique perspective of also being a child star. So like, she knew him, like Backstreet Boys were on Sabrina. She filmed with Aaron a little bit, but I don't think she was there because of her connection to Aaron necessarily. I think it was that perspective that she can share in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I wish they kind of flushed that out a little bit more, but I find it more connected later. We get more.
Right.
Yeah, we'll get there.
No, I totally had that in my notes too. Like, why weren't we hearing from his friends? Like, why weren't there more people closer to him? It seems like Melissa was sort of like a subject matter expert, if you will, of like what it's like to grow up under the spotlight and then have to figure out your craft, your art as an adult, and what happens when those two things don't connect. And Soleil Moonfry, who directed this, she also was a child star. She was Punky Brewster in the 80s. So I'm sure that she also was trying to sort of, through the interviews, tell that story of the pressure that is on these kids when they are the headliner,
Yeah.
So that was kind of what I put together after the fact. But I agree. I was waiting for her to be like, we were best friends. And like, here are all these photos of us together. And we just didn't really see that. So that's my guess.
Yeah.
No one said that anywhere. I'm just trying to surmise.
Yeah.
So back to the documentary. So the stage is now set that Nick and Backstreet Boys are taking off. And we see this footage of little baby Aaron. He is recording in a booth and he just has this little chipmunk voice. Like, it literally sounded like he just put his voice through one of those, like, generator things, like a filter on TikTok or something. It's so cute. And he was invited to tour with Backstreet Boys at just 10 years old.
Oh my God, yeah. And Angel said, Aaron got into singing because Nick got into singing. And Aaron idolized Nick and wanted to just be like Nick, which, totally makes sense. Like big brother to little brother. Like, of course, that's what he wanted to do. Angel was like, the opportunity to go on tour at 10 years old, like, that's really exciting. And so to talk about this a little bit, we get the next guest, and that was Stan Jones. He was Aaron's musical director starting back in 1999. And he described Aaron as a master performer. And he's like, unlike the Backstreet Boys, like Aaron was a solo artist and he had to be able to command that entire stage on his own at an early age, 10 years old. And Stan Jones was like, Aaron did that. He worked every single ounce of that stage. He was able to pull it off.
Ugh, at 10. And I love how they described Aaron as like a very curious musician too. They said he was always practicing, always wanting to learn more about the instruments, like trying every piece of, the band. And I thought that was so sweet. There's an interview where he's just this little kid in a bowl cut. We got a lot of bowl cut footage. That long, shaggy, like Hanson hair. And Aaron is being asked about what going on tour is like and if it's fun. And he says, really much. It's really much fun. And it just like that little like slip up calling it really much. Like that's what a 10-year-old sounds like and talks like. And to think that he was working like an adult it just broke my heart to see that little piece of the kid come through,
I know. He's there being kind of paraded around like a little man, but deep down, he's just a little boy. And Angel was like, Aaron is a mini version of Nick. So his rise to fame kind of happened quick and naturally.
I mean, like from a marketing perspective, like if Nick was too old for you, if you're a younger fan, like you had Aaron to crush on, like he was like our age, it was like a dream.
I know. I mean, I've told this story numerous times. Like I was like, oh, Nick is a little too old for me, so I'll just go for Aaron. That's what you tell yourself as a delusional 10-year-old fan.
We all thought that during the Lizzie McGuire episode.
Absolutely. And, I just always grabbed, they had a couple collaborations and Nick appeared on multiple Aaron songs and it was just something I always gravitated towards. And it could not be, honestly, more perfect. Angel spent a lot of time on tour with Aaron during those years, and she said to her, it seems like he was born to do this, born to perform and to be a star. And it was really special for her to get to see her twin shine like that. But as we all know, with all that, there was a tremendous amount of pressure put on Aaron throughout his entire childhood.
And Angel really distills this paradox of being a child star. Like, here's this kid who loves it. He's so lucky to have the opportunity, so good at it, but it's just not okay under any circumstance for children to work like adults. And we see some interview footage of Jane, who is Aaron's mom, saying, like, oh, a normal kid would go to dance lessons and, that's kind of what he's doing now, but it's not the same, Jane. It's not the same at all.
No. And I just can't imagine having that kind of pressure or responsibility on me at that age. Like most of us would never be able to do that or cope with that, like especially as a solo artist, it's just you can tell in some of this footage that he is struggling with it a bit. Like they seem to be doing like dance rehearsals and they're just doing it over and over. And he's probably 10 in this footage or 12 and he has his head in his hands in certain parts. Like it's just not what like a 10-year-old should not be dealing with the stress and the pressure and the grind of like learning a tour routine, something like that.
Yeah.
Like go play, have fun. Like this is not meant for children. And while he obviously loved it, it's just like not okay. And as Angel articulated, it just, poof, it took his childhood away from him. And we learned that, Bob Carter was his dad. It was Aaron's business manager, and Jane was his momager, if you will. But immediate red flags in this one. Holy shit. Angel recalls a time on tour when Aaron articulated that he really he wanted to go home. And in this instance, and in other instances, his parents would say something, like, go finish this tour, just finish it and we'll buy you a boat or we'll buy you a diamond necklace. Like it kind of just bribe him through the rest of the dates. And you got to wonder, first of all, I bet he never got any of those things. And you got to wonder just how things would have turned out if they would have just let him go home and be a kid.
Oh, it's so sad. And we talked about this a lot with Ashley Spencer, who is the author of Disney High. So definitely check out that interview if you haven't already. Some of the kids who turned out okay had really strong guardrails around them, like Hilary Duff's parents. But music seems to be like the wild, wild west. And even Perez Hilton, when he was on, he was like, the music industry is so brutal, and there's like no rules there. And I mean, these kids were not protected from other adults in the industry, let alone when sometimes the people they needed to be protected from were their own parents, who not only were in control of them, like their custody, but they were also in charge of the purse strings and all of their professional engagements.
Oh my God. The people that are supposed to protect you are the ones that are, oh my God, what's the word?
Hurting you.
Yeah,
taking advantage.
Yes. So on that note, we get some of the dysfunctional family history background with Jane and Bob. Apparently, she met him hitchhiking. Again, red flags. Hello. But apparently, Bob Carter back in the day was just like a womanizing heartthrob. Like, Jane knew who he was, and she didn't think she had a chance with him.
But like, can we talk about hitchhiking for a second? Like, that's just one of those things that used to be like normal in our culture that just like blows my mind. Like, I can't believe that people just used to do that.
No. Oh my
like,
God.
What if no one comes? Like, how long are you prepared to be walking for? Like, there's just so many logistics that you just leave up to chance.
Thank God it's not really a thing anymore.
Jeez.
But we learned that mental health disorders run deep in the Carter family per Angel, along with alcoholism. She told us how, Bob and Jane owned a bar in upstate New York before moving to Tampa, and Nick, as a baby, literally grew up in this bar, like grew up in that environment. I think he talked about that in his biography too, how young he was when he was exposed to alcohol and first had alcohol. Angel also disclosed there was a lot of infidelity coming from Bob, but Jane always went back to him. So the move to Tampa was meant to be kind of a fresh start. And Angel remembers her parents were always drinking. They were always partying. There were drugs. Like, imagine as a child remembering your parents doing drugs when you're a child. Like, I just
crazy.
And just like a ton of fighting. And she believes that money became the driving force for them instead of parenting and being present for their children.
It's really sad. And like when you realize what they were spending their money on, it's like, what the hell? Like, it wasn't to better the lives of their children.
No, it certainly was not. So by 1998, again, Aaron is 10 years old and he is working in LA. His parents aren't in LA at that time, though, so they decide to uproot to be with their minor child who is helping pay the bills, thank God. And that's when we're introduced as viewers to Lori Knight. She's still on the scene working with Nick, to the best of my knowledge. But she met Aaron first, and she met him teaching at a performing arts school. And someone called the school. They needed a coach to work with Aaron on his stage presence. He had just signed a deal with Jive Zamba, and they were looking for someone to kind of mentor him and teach him how to work a stage as a solo 10-year-old performer. And she talks about how she went to the Carters, like, quote unquote, mansion in LA and described the experience as like a Tim Burton movie. Like, everything looked normal from the outside, but like something was still off. And we do get some footage from inside that. And it just does look kind of like not upkept. There was a plastic light up palm tree in the living room. It just like didn't look like a nurturing home that you would come home to as a child.
The ceramic cockatoo really stood out to me.
Yes. It just looked chaotic, to be honest with you. And so he went on this little promo tour, and Lori Knight went on the road with Aaron for this. And when they got back, Bob and Jane asked her to be his tour manager. And she had only been in LA for a year. She had no idea what a tour manager did, but she was like, this is a family with 2 kids in the industry. Like, what else am I going to do? Like, of course I'm going to say yes. And then she's asked for her first impressions of Aaron, and she gets choked up talking about this. Like, I mean, she's literally known him probably longer than a lot of people that were in his life. And she just described him as a little sweet, bubbly ball of energy, full of life and joyful. And she remembered thinking like, wow, this kid is super special.
It's really sweet.
I know. And so here we get another connection to Melissa Joan Hart, because Aaron also appeared on Sabrina and performed I Want Candy on the show, one of his biggest hits. And Melissa Joan Hart commented, she didn't remember ever seeing family really on set with him. And another tie-in to Melissa Joan Hart. I'm feeling it's making more sense to me now. But the next celebrity guest is probably my favorite, because I just really liked following this story and learning about it from the first time in this documentary, and that is Scout Willis. And I was just like, what the hell is Scout Willis doing here? Like, are you kidding me? So I did not go into it optimistically, but I really enjoyed the story. So she recalls when she was 10 years old, she became quote unquote batshit obsessed with Aaron Carter. And like, girl, I can relate to you on that. This resonated with me. She was
That
like,
was when I knew. I was like, I'm so glad she's in this.
I know, 100. I was like, oh, this is going to be good. Like, this is the kind of story that I'm like, wanting.
She's us.
This. Yeah.
Like she represents the fans' voice.
Right. And celebs, they're just like us. But she's like, I literally like would go to bed and pray to meet him. It's like, girl, same. So it was her 12th birthday, and her family, and that includes, Bruce Willis, casual. They went to Disney World for her 12th birthday. And like one night at dinner, she remembered like the vibes were kind of weird. And all of a sudden, Bruce walks in with Aaron Carter. And he literally like, I know and like, what a cool dad move, by the way. Like that's incredible. And she's like, I let out the most piercing fangirl scream. And like, you could just tell she got so much joy revisiting the story. And like, this is like the dream we all had. Like, this is what, Aaron Carter would show up at our birthday party. Like, what are the odds? Like, this was just incredible. But she mentioned, of course, she noticed that, Aaron came without parents or adults. He was basically there as minor still, just unaccompanied. And he had so much fun with them at dinner that he decided to stay the whole weekend with them at Disney World. And we get pictures from that. And she was like, reflecting, looking back, I see that how rare this situation must have been for him to get to spend time, hang out with kids his own age, not be working. Like, what a special and unique moment for him, which, again, this is so sad because we're talking about a kid. Sweet story, but also with these kind of sad undertones. And so we go back to Angel. She's talking now about Aaron and Nick and their special relationship, the two brothers, the two boys. And we get that video. We've all seen it if you're a Backstreet Boys fan, where Nick surprises Aaron on his tour. Nick comes on stage and like hugs Aaron, and Aaron just cries and cries and cries. And, like, he can't stop crying, and he's, his little lips quivering. And that's by no means new footage, but every time I see that, I'm just like, God, that's so special.
So this was the first time I cried watching this documentary. And you're right, I have seen that footage before. I think a lot of us fans have. But man, I was like crying into my oatmeal. It was like big fat tears. And it was, Nick said he hadn't seen Aaron in like 6 months at that point. Like, it had been so long. And, that's just pure sibling love right there. Those bonds are just so crucial. And it just really killed me knowing what we know, that Aaron didn't really have a great father figure, that he had a manager instead of a dad. And it just, it broke my heart.
And Angel said that Nick was always supporting Aaron. And she said they grew up leaning on one another during a rough home life. Like, obviously Aaron and Angel were twins, but like, they were the two boys. I'm sure they were there for each other a lot. And we get some really tough stories from Angel's experience in the family. She said she was first left on her own starting at 13 years old. And now, my mom maybe left me alone when I was 13 years old to run down to the grocery store and get some food for dinner and then come home. But this is not the same thing, people. Angel was left home for periods of time, like days, weeks, while her parents went off and followed the brothers and were doing God knows what. But she also tells a terrible story about being left alone with a man on a tour bus for over a month, and this man who eventually tried to sexually assault her. And she brought it to her dad, and he was like, oh, just lock the doors at night, and it's just disgusting. She says that, sexual assault did happen in that family. Members of that family were sexually assaulted, and that they were always seemingly had like strange men around.
Ugh. It's so gross and so sad. And you could tell this was really difficult for her to talk about. There was one moment that Lori recalled where she got a call from Angel, and Angel was like, her parents just left. They left no money. She had no food, no shampoo. Like, she wasn't able to bathe all the way. And she was just straight up neglected because she wasn't in show business. Like, what the hell? Like, you still have 3 daughters, you know?
I know. And it's like if they weren't bringing the money in, they didn't get parented, you know? And not that Nick and Aaron got parented. They were just, you know, there
They
to
got attention.
Yes, got attention. But to try to find a silver lining in a terrible situation, Angel thinks that being neglected in this way, like, saved her somehow. You know, like, the parents' obsession with the boys, it forced her to spend time with her friends and their family. She had no one else to go to. And so she was like, I was able to go to my friends' families and sit down and have dinner with them, like, experience a normal childhood. And she got that when a lot of her siblings did not. She talked about BJ, you know, her older sister BJ. She said to deal with this kind of neglect that the other girls got as well, because again, they weren't really in showbiz, BJ used alcohol to deal. And apparently more than just alcohol. And Angel said she got addicted to drugs at 13 years old. Like,
so sad.
Now, Lori tells us a story. Aaron had been touring for about a year. Lori was managing him at the time, and he had just finished opening for Britney Spears. There's a cute picture of the two of them. I'd never seen that before. And apparently, after this tour, Aaron had been promised 4 weeks off. He was going to get to go home. But as soon as it ended, Lori got a call from the higher-ups. They were like, there's a schedule change. Aaron needs to go to New York. He's going to star in Seussical, the musical. And Lori was like, fuck no, to use her words. This kid needs a break. He's going home. But she wasn't his parent. She really didn't have a say. And obviously, Bob and Jane had said this was okay because, you know, you have to check with the guardians, you know, to get something like that approved. And Lori revealed that Bob and Jane, as we kind of discussed earlier, used to manipulate Aaron. Like, if you do this, we can do anything you want afterwards. But like, as I suspected, they never really got him that boat or that diamond necklace. They just kept extending his time on the road and, you know, promising they'd go on a trip. They do a family vacation. She's like, yeah, they did the family vacation, but they did it without him. Devastating. And Lori told just a horrifying story of around this time one night she heard Aaron, you know, like crying, sobbing in the living room. And she goes out to see what's going on. And she sees him sitting there with the butcher knife to his throat. I just can only imagine the pain that he must have been feeling and the loneliness he must have been feeling. And so Lori says, you know, she got the bodyguard in there. They got rid of the knife. But then she got on the phone with Nick and put him in touch with Aaron. And she said that Nick and Aaron were on the phone all night. And by the end of it, she could hear him laughing and, you know, sounding better. And Nick was always able to kind of put him in a better mood like that. But this was clearly a Band-Aid on a much bigger issue. And Lori was like, I couldn't turn to Bob and Jane to help Aaron feel loved or cared about. Like, I had to turn to Nick in those pivotal moments. And he was always there. He always showed up for Aaron when he needed him. And just in reflection, it just makes me so sad thinking about that, like with knowing how strained, you know, their relationship became in those final years of Aaron's life. But obviously, things are not all glittery and shimmery. And Angel says at this point that, like, she really wanted her parents to get divorced. She was so fed up with the chaos, the fighting, and the drama. You rarely hear a kid say, like, oh, God, I hope my mom and dad get divorced.
And I mean, that Aaron story is so sad. And like, if all of that wasn't difficult enough to hear, just wait until you hear about this. So Angel's talking about how the divorce negotiations went down. And apparently somebody, we already know Bob and Jane have horrible decision-making skills. They thought it was a good idea to get Lou Pearlman, swindler and con man, to be qualified to help this family talk through how to parent the kids throughout this divorce. And they basically, Angel described him as sort of like a moderator, as like a family therapist as they're talking about the divorce. I can't imagine that he has any credentials that would make that appropriate. But they basically tried to pull like a parent trap with a sick twist. They asked Angel and Aaron to pick which parent, their mom or their dad, that they wanted to live with. I mean, these are kids. They are not the ones who should be making these decisions. And Jane assumed, like, she wanted Aaron because she wanted control of his money and control of his career. And I think with that, she's sort of assumed that she'd also have to take Angel because, they're twins and keep the siblings together. Well, Aaron picked his mom and Angel picked her dad, Bob. She felt like life with him might be more stable, a little bit more predictable than life with her mother.
So the twins are separated. Angel was relieved, happy that this divorce was happening. Meanwhile, she said that Aaron and Leslie took it really, really hard, on the other hand. And now we get another guest introduced in the documentary, and that's Ginger Carter, the Carter siblings' stepmother. Apparently, like, Bob and Ginger got married, like, literally immediately. Like, they met one weekend. He flew her out to New York, like, the next weekend and then proposed. It was just, like, an insane origin story. And Ginger was 28 at the time. I have a feeling Bob was a lot older than that, at least 10 years, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, in the photos, he looks so much older than her. I will admit that I was judgmental at first and a little nervous. Like, why is this young, cute girl marrying this old alcoholic man, like, with two of the most famous sons in the world at the time? But I am happy to admit that after watching, I was very wrong, and Ginger seems really sweet.
I know. And Ginger talks about how she just had no idea what she was, like, walking into with this, what was going on and behind the scenes with this family. She actually had her own daughter, a 4-year-old, that she was also bringing into this environment. And some sweet commentary we got from Angel. She was like, Ginger was such a great mother figure that filled a void for her that she needed. And like, this was the first time for me that I learned that Angel had such a positive relationship with her stepmother. I did not know that before this doc. And it was just such a relief for me that with all this darkness, like, Ginger was a light, at least for Angel.
Oh, yes. And it made me really happy for Angel and vindicated, that after that very difficult decision she had to make to pick which parent to live with, like, it didn't sound like either option was amazing for her. Like, both Bob and Jane had their own issues, but at least she got a stable parent figure out of it. That mother figure that she desperately wanted and just wasn't getting from Jane.
And, it sounds like Ginger gets indoctrinated into the family pretty quickly. They're down in the Keys at the houses in the Keys that they have. And apparently one day Jane Carter just showed up and sprinted to the house, kicked in the door. She was screaming that she wanted to get Bob back. There was this huge physical altercation. Like, Ginger described it, she was like, I just wanted to get out from under the pile that was, like, Jane and Bob fighting and get down to my 4-year-old daughter and make sure that she was okay during all of this. But, again, devastating. And it's Aaron is the one that ultimately calls 911 to get his mother, Jane, arrested. She goes to jail. And then it's again Aaron that goes and bails her out of jail. And Angel's like, incidents like this were common. Like, this probably happened all the time. And the police weren't called. This is just the one that we as the public heard about because it was out in the press.
This was so crazy the way she described it. Like, the mom, like, popped her head in and then ran into the house and the kids are, like, chasing her. And, like, it's the middle of the night. Like, it sounded like a freaking horror movie.
Terrifying.
It
honestly.
sounded terrifying. Yes. Like, to call the police on your own parent and, it's just so devastating.
So we go to Lori from that, Lori Knight again, and she talks about how this bitter divorce was basically over Aaron's money. Like, this is what they were fighting over. And by 15 years old, Aaron was worried that his money wasn't being handled well. Like, Lori realized they were in South America, and Bob asked that Aaron's money from whatever event he was doing be paid in cash, and then he didn't put the money in Aaron's, like, typical operational account. She's like, he's clearly stealing from his child. And Lori alleges that Bob did the same thing with Nick. He would just take money from Nick's operational account to pay his own debts. And, Nick found out and fired Bob as his business manager. And Lori was like, his attitude seemed to kind of be like, my kid, my money, you know? And according to Angel, once Nick fired Bob as his money manager, like Jane got mad because they obviously lost some of this control that they had over Nick. So that's when she started trying to manipulate and pin Nick and Aaron against one another. According to Angel, she would, kind of fuel the fire. She'd be like, you're more talented than Nick, like he doesn't care or love you anymore. He abandoned you. Like, you're going to be a bigger star than Nick. Just you wait. Just kind of, again, fueling this fire of pitting these two brothers against each other and making sure the claws are deeper into Aaron so they can keep that control over the money.
And sadly, that continued as we see in part 2, foreshadowing. She continues to do that. And some people may have seen that on Aaron's Instagram lives. He would be FaceTiming with his mom and just saying horrible things. And she would be saying horrible things about Nick to like stoke that anger within Aaron. Also, Jane literally stole from Aaron. So all of his concerns were absolutely accurate that his parents were not doing right by his funds. Because when Aaron turned 18 and he was able to assume his own trust, he only had $2.8 million in the bank, but he owed the IRS $2 million because his parents stopped paying his taxes when they were going through their divorce. No one is looking out for this kid, so he's broke.
They should be on the hook for the money. If they were the legal guardian, he shouldn't be on hook for taxes if he wasn't an adult to pay for them in the first place. It makes me...
So many failures. There's no safeguards for these kids.
So he's broke. This is he's at this point where he's not as big in his career anymore. It's not the best time for him. So
I also heard that a lot of people were just sick of dealing with his parents.
Yeah, which of course they were. So now in the documentary, we cut to September 2024, and we're seeing Angel go to see Nick at his solo show in Chicago. And they have a sit-down conversation in this that they, agreed to film for the documentary. And Nick revealed, he says something along the lines of, Aaron and I have the same story. We have this misplaced trust. Every time we would come across anybody, they would prove that they could not be trusted. They were looking for something from one of them, and this caused this vicious cycle of not knowing who to trust. And Nick says, I've been in this industry for 31 years. I've been doing this for so long. It's a lot of pressure. And, at this point, Nick is in tears. And he references a Smokey Robinson song, Tears of a Clown. And he's like, that's me. I put on the smile when I'm sad inside. So then basically that's the end of the first episode. I have to wonder if that was a very emotional show for Nick that night in Chicago.
How did he go on stage after that?
I know, but the credits of the episode include Aaron's song Recovery that was not released prior to his death. But actually, Angel had it released posthumously. And it's one of my favorite Aaron Carter songs. And it's just heartbreaking to have with all this information we're learning and all this footage we're seeing. But really appreciative of that Angel was able to get that song out there and incorporate it into this documentary. So we move on to part 2 and we resume back with Aaron and Angel in Chicago. And we seem to be getting more of Nick's recollections here. And he's reminiscing about the time he was really young and he won a talent show and won a $150 check. And he was like, the only thing I could think of at this time is I just wanted my dad to be proud of me. And he knew that the family was struggling with money. And he was like, you know what? I'm going to give my dad this check that I won to help pay the bills. And he did. And he said his dad's eyes lit up and he was like, oh, congratulations, son. He's like, it's the first time I got this validation and attention from my dad. And, I think it was instilled, maybe if not then, but around that age, at a very young age, that money would be the solution to all these problems in this household.
That was so devastating.
I know. And so we cut to, the next stage in the story, which is the House of Carter's reality show, where all 5 siblings moved into, a house Nick rented for this show on E! And Angel said, when Nick asked them all to come out, all the siblings were excited to do this. It gave them an excuse to get away from Bob and Jane and also kind of a fresh start. They had some money in their pockets, a platform. Oh, God. Chaotic would be an understatement to describe this show. It was extremely hard to watch as a Backstreet Boys fan, as a Carter fan. You could tell there was a lot of hurt and anger there.
I did not watch the show. I still haven't seen it. I would see commercials for it all the time, and I was like, I just don't know that this is something I want to watch. It looked really heavy and dark. Angel was sort of describing their roles on the show. Leslie just really wanted to be heard. She wanted her pain to be known and be validated. And BJ was struggling with her addiction, and so was Aaron. And they show these little clips. And I mean, were they really strung out like that on the show? Was it obvious when you were watching it that they were using drugs?
No, because as a kid, I didn't really know what using drugs, at that age, I didn't really know what that looked like. But I bet if I watched it as an adult and knowing what we knew now, it probably would be more obvious. Yes.
Right. That's a good point. We were pretty young when this was out and pretty naive. So Angel also, I think she wanted to tell the viewers that this show had a bigger purpose than just kind of showing what a shit show they were. I think most people came away from this being like, wow, what a shit show. But she was trying to say no, it was much more than what was just portrayed on camera. This was a real moment for us all to come together. And, it was a moment for us to bond as siblings and try to get over some long held, beef that we had and hurt that we had.
Yeah. And she said Nick felt a lot of responsibility to be a father figure to the siblings. But as Angel said, the reality was they just needed their actual parents to step up, just give us the bare minimum here. But at the end of the show, after the show had wrapped filming, apparently, Nick sat all the siblings down and was like, okay, who wants to do therapy? I'll pay for it. Let's do this. And Angel was the only one who took him up on that offer. And she truly believes it's the reason that her and Nick are the ones that are still here, because they got help. I think while the show was going on and after, Aaron was, already deep into his addiction, and he wasn't willing to take that next step and do therapy with his siblings.
Angel said at this point they were all privately trying to help him, but I don't know that it was super public yet.
And in 2009, there seemed to be a kind of a glimmer of hope, and Aaron got Dancing with the Stars, and Angel said he was so excited, and it was seen as this opportunity for him to kind of change the direction of his life.
Oh my God, I was living for the clips. I never saw that season. He was so good. And he just has this megawatt smile in all of the clips. It was so sweet.
You can tell he's really enjoying it. I don't know how someone I wonder who won that season, because how could they have been much better? We're tying Melissa Joan Hart back in again because she was also on Dancing with the Stars apparently that season. This was the most relevant commentary I thought that she had brought to the documentary this far. And she was he was trying to figure out where he fit. And is it a singer? Is it this? This was such a pivotal point in his journey. And he was given this kind of second chance. And I don't know if it's because they didn't win or just because this was kind of, again, a Band-Aid on a bigger issue. But he got eliminated from Dancing with the Stars. And you can tell they're doing the interview after it, and you can tell it hit him really hard. He's holding back tears.
They were rolling down his cheek.
Yeah.
It was so sad. And I think this is where, having purpose, having a goal that you're working towards. I think what we've heard from Angel is Nick, Kevin, AJ, Brian. Aaron was really struggling because after he got dropped from his label, what are you working towards? You're just sort of adrift. And without a goal to work towards, you can become lost. And this gave him something to work for. It gave him something to look forward to. He had something that was better than drugs, for the first time in a while. And that must have been really difficult to see so much hope and being so optimistic that this was, a turnaround point from him. And, Melissa knows better than anybody what it's like to sort of go from that nonstop,
Yeah.
filming something every single day and being, everyone wants you, everyone needs you. And then all of a sudden, no one wants anything from you. And
Right.
how do you chase that high again?
I know, tough. But we pivot. We get to meet Angel's husband, Corey. And Angel said, as a little girl, she doesn't know if it's Disney movies her to blame or what, but she just knew that one day her prince would save her from this family. And that's when we cut to her husband, Corey Conrad. And she was like, I was not into him. He was a nice guy, and dating a nice guy was foreign. Plus, Corey came from a structured, traditional family. She had said she always kind of went for guys that were more like her dad, And so she wasn't into it originally, but he won her over. And Corey reflects that there was a time when him and Aaron were legitimately best friends. Aaron lived with them. He spent a lot of time with Corey and Angel. And Corey reflected that, Aaron was always in a relationship. And it seemed like there was a part of Aaron that wanted to start a family to show, unlike his parents, despite his parents, he could do that. He could have a functional relationship. He could have a family of his own. And, that made me kind of sad. But Angel said that Leslie and Aaron always talked about death and dying, from a young age. They didn't see themselves living for a long time, according to Angel, which is just so eerie to hear.
It's sad.
I
It means that they
know.
already had given up,
I guess that is what that means. But even despite that, Angel said she was absolutely blindsided when Leslie died. Leslie was the first of the Carter siblings to pass away. Apparently, she went to see Ginger and Bob, and she was tired. She wanted to catch up on some sleep. So Ginger and Bob were watching her baby at the time, Leslie's baby, while she caught up on some sleep. And they went into her room the next day, and she had passed away from an overdose. And according to Angel, Leslie went through some unimaginable abuse as a child. And we even get just some tip of the iceberg footage, which really bugged me. We hear Jane and Bob talking about Leslie, oh, we've got a mean kid, and smacking her and holding her head under the water in the pool.
That was awful.
Yeah, to, teach her a lesson. And that's just what they caught on camera, family friendly footage that they had on camera.
It's really sad.
How hurtful that must have been. And this is when we get the drama. There was a big drama in the media about Leslie's funeral because Nick ultimately did not attend this funeral. And there were a lot of bad headlines about that. And Angel kind of pulls the curtains back on what happened to lead to that. And she said, Nick had every intention of being at Leslie's funeral. He even had a show nearby and was planning to come there right after. And the day after Leslie's death, in preparations for all of this, Nick had called Bob, and they hadn't talked for years, apparently. And the first thing that Bob did when he called the day after, Leslie's death was ask Nick for money. And apparently it was not apparently, just did not go well, understandably. And Angel was already at Bob's and was hearing that side of the conversation. And she said, I ran upstairs and called Nick right after. And she was like, Nick, don't come. She knew it was just going to be a really difficult and toxic environment just by hearing that other side of the conversation. And, that's ultimately why Nick didn't go. A lot more painful than, the media headlines would speculate. He just couldn't be bothered or didn't have the time. And so we move on. We're back to Aaron, and we see a lot of clips, a montage here of Aaron being asked questions. He's doing interviews, press about Nick, when Aaron's a child star. And it's just so sad watching him trying to navigate these constant comparison questions and differentiate himself. And these clips kind of progress through the years. In the beginning, you can be he's more chipper about it. And then we see later clips and he's just something like Rosie O'Donnell maybe asked him there's a Backstreet Boy's a brother of yours or something. He's we don't need to talk about him. By the end, you can just tell he's had it with the comparisons to Nick. And we come to a part of the story where it's a really exciting time for Aaron. He has this fresh start. He had the whole drama with the IRS. He had to pay a ton of money, didn't have much money left. So he was able to declare bankruptcy and start over, basically. And he called his musical director that they had on earlier. It was clear he had been working with a vocal coach. She seemed to be more an adult, more mature. And we see some very gut-wrenching interview clips of him being so happy that he gets the second chance, a new start, so grateful to his fans. And again, it's just very hard to see knowing what is to come.
I know. They're like, oh, he's been working out. His vocals were stronger than ever. He clearly was taking voice lessons. And we see these interviews where Aaron is very emotional and saying, he got his career back and he never thought it would happen. But, it's because of his fans. And it showed how grateful he was for all of his fans. And I'm sure, if any of his, fans were watching this documentary, I'm sure they felt happy that, they included how much he cared for his fans and interacted with them.
On to a lighter note, we get Scout Willis back.
Scout was literally the bright light in this very dark and sad documentary.
I was like, yes. So this means they had another interaction, and interaction they did have. So she's at college. She's at frickin', I think she said Brown. And Aaron is playing a solo show in Rhode Island. And so she's like, I texted someone I knew who worked at the venue and was like, oh, I know Aaron, would love to go. And then it turns out Aaron really wanted to see her. And they had the sweetest reunion backstage. And he pulled her on stage during the concert as well and did, probably saying I'm all about you to her or something like that, But then after the fact, it was really, she said he just seemed so happy. It was going really well. And she said after the fact that he asked her to be his girlfriend. And she was kind of she hadn't seen him in years. And she's like, you're going on tour. And, but she's again, looking back, he was probably just so lonely. It was just clearly looking for real love. He probably felt more so with her than many people, comfortable, connected with her, and just probably felt that he could trust her more than just, someone that he met off the street.
Ugh, I'm obsessed with Scout leaning into the full fangirl of it all. It felt really authentic and honest coming from her. And I really appreciated that. And I also appreciated her take on all of this and her perspective. It is just really sad how few people he had in his life for being so famous and being a household name. He really didn't have anyone he could count on. And at this point, so we see him serenading her on stage and they share a smooch, as she calls it. But there's also this montage of him serenading little girls at his concert since he was 10 years old with that little bowl cut that we were talking about earlier. And he has his hands on the shoulder of one girl and he's sort of swaying and they're awkward because they're 10 years old. And I just thought wow, this is kind of messed up that they had a 10-year-old serenading. And it just didn't feel really age appropriate for him to be doing that at 10 years old. And, Angel goes on to say that he just wanted to be loved, but he really had no opportunity to build relationships like a normal kid would by playing or going to school. He doesn't have anyone. He probably thought of Scout as a childhood friend from that one weekend that they spent together.
And just associated great positive memories with her. And, no, he knew she probably wasn't looking for anything from him,
Right.
But so we get to Angel's wedding and she reflects on how special her wedding day was, largely because of Aaron, and how proud and happy he was to walk her down the aisle.
Oh my God. He's sobbing, walking her down the aisle. Oh my God. That was another part where I cried.
I know. And
Angel was I was just smiling really big.
So she was
consoling him.
Yeah. And she said the wedding was just so foreign for Aaron because he couldn't believe the people were there loved Angel and Corey as humans, not because they were expecting something from them, not because they were paying their bills. They just were their friends and their family and their people. And Aaron was just so emotional and overwhelmed about that. He couldn't. It was so foreign to him, and just that is Just imagine finding that foreign.
Devastating.
I know. And Angel also picked her. I saw Jane Carter in the footage, and Angel said that, she picked her mom over having her dad at her wedding. So Jane was there, Bob was not. I don't know if Jane made it like, they didn't say, like if Jane was like, I'll only go like if your father doesn't go or something like that. But she seemed to regret not having Bob at his wedding and he did comment like, I would have come if you would have asked me. So that's why I wonder if Jane was like, it's me or him, but we don't know.
Yeah. So beyond Angel's wedding, we learn that Bob and his wife Ginger end up having a son together. And Ginger suspects that one of the reasons why Bob wanted to become a father again, even though he already had 7 children, was because he wanted to like prove to himself that he could raise a child in a functional way, in a functional relationship. And that just made me really sad.
And it seemed to kind of get to him. Like one day he called Angel and said, I just want you to know how sorry I am. Like I should have been a better parent. He was, crying, and Angel forgave him. She was like, that's what I needed. Just hearing him acknowledge it. That is what I needed.
Apparently in that conversation, he said, I just want to raise one kid right. He has 8 children. And for him to tell his daughter, I just want to get one right. Like that's really sad. And I guess he was sharing this with Ginger, his wife, and Ginger gets emotional during this interview. And she's like, it just makes me feel guilty because he was so good to their son. I think his name is Camden.
Yeah.
She has kind of a thick accent, so I wasn't totally sure what their son's name was. But, she was like, I just feel so guilty because I know that he is a great dad because he was a great dad to our son together. And that's why she feels like she knows that Bob was capable of doing it. It just, all these other things he let get in the way of him being a good dad. And he was aware of that and felt very guilty about it. That's not to say, though, that Ginger and Bob did not have their issues. This wasn't like a magical thing where he all of a sudden became like a perfect husband and a perfect dad. He apparently hurt his back and ended up becoming addicted to his pain meds. And Ginger gave him an ultimatum. She was like, it's me or the pills. And he picked the pills. And he passed away, they believe it was from a heart attack in May of 2017. And in the last years of his life, he was living on a tour bus and just totally broke. And what's even more devastating about this is at the time of Bob's passing, Aaron was doing really well. They described him as being in an upswing. But after Bob passed away, Aaron started self-medicating again, and he just totally spiraled. And Angel shares, she was really worried that something was going to happen to Aaron. And it did. He got arrested. And there are clips of Aaron doing this ET interview, totally denying being a drug addict. But he does say that he is suffering from multiple mental illnesses, including schizophrenia and multiple personality disorder, acute anxiety, and more. He was kind of just like rattling off all these issues that he was having.
He also rattled off about 5 to 6 prescription drugs that he was prescribed at the time, which was also a bit eye-opening and something Angel talks about a little bit later.
Yeah, Angel. What also struck me about this documentary was there were a lot of phone calls that were recorded. I mean, it was clear that Angel wanted this like as evidence. I don't know if it was for, the psychiatric hold that they were requesting. I don't know, why you'd record a conversation like that. But they have all of this, you hear his voice like denying that he's a drug addict. And Aaron is really fighting her on not wanting to get help. He keeps saying, it's Aaron's decision. Aaron's going to do what's best for Aaron. And this is when we get into Aaron's infamous Instagram lives that I think we all kind of remember seeing popping up on our feeds back then.
These were so hard to revisit because, like, you could just tell he was lonely and wanted the social interaction. That's why he did all these lives. But, like, people were so mean to him and he just, like, got wrapped up on it and ended up just like fighting back. It just was like this vicious cycle.
It was absolutely vicious. And Angel really wanted him to get off social media, but Aaron became like addicted to it, even though people were saying these horrific things and just bullying him horribly. And he just like seemed to not, I don't know, there was something about it that kept him coming back and fighting with people in the comments and reading off all the things they would say to him. People would call him these horrible names, and he became defensive, and that would just suppress himself even further. But Angel makes this point that he was bullied to the point where he became a bully himself, and he became the aggressor. And this then turned into him not just turning against the people in his comments or his followers, people who are commenting on his lives, but against his own family and going after his siblings and his family members. And Aaron is airing all the dirty laundry about the siblings wanting him to get help. He said, they tried to put me in a conservatorship. They tried to have me committed, and, they want my money. And it's just really sad to see this like slow descendance. So now it's 2019, and Aaron has gotten off of Xanax, and he is doing better, but he's not doing well, as Angel says. And he's just really depressed, and he goes on these lives, and he's he's inconsolably upset. And Angel reaches out again, and she says, you need to get some help. You need to go on some antidepressants. And, Aaron came back to her and said he had a psychiatrist, he had a doctor he was going to, and he was going to get what he needed to get better.
And you can tell Angel really wanted him to try therapy instead of just immediately resorting like solely to pills, like, a balance of both. Instead of just like covering the feelings and the pain, also like trying to heal from this trauma that they went through. But according to Angel, he was not open to, that or to therapy, and the mania and the bad habits like slowly returned.
Oh my God, this next part made me so sad. So Angel's recalling a FaceTime between her and Aaron reveals he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. And she said, she's detailing this conversation between them where she's asking him about the thoughts that he's having. And he says that, he thinks about killing babies. And at this time, Angel's daughter is 8 months old. And Angel is like trying not to freak out or anything. And she's just, I think, trying to understand where he's coming from and like, how bad is this really? Is this like smoke and mirrors, or like how much does he really need help right now? And she's like, okay, like, do you think about killing me? He said no. And she's like, okay, well then, like, who else are you thinking? Like, do you think about hurting anyone else? And Aaron says, yes, Lauren, who is Nick's wife. And Angel understandably is just like stunned by this conversation, and she, not having any parents to turn to, goes to Lori. And Lori sort of encouraged her to just like think about it. Is this just Aaron like reaching for attention? Do we really know? Like, we don't really know how bad this is. Like, is he just saying these things because he's in, who knows? And Angel obviously really struggled if she should tell her brother Nick about this. She didn't want to hurt Aaron, of course. And a few weeks later, Aaron started acquiring these guns and showing them off on social media. He has like AK-47s. America, what the fuck? Like, how is that allowed? Like, it's just devastating. And, this is a visibly ill person acquiring all of these firearms. And I can imagine, if I heard someone saying the same things, I'd be very disturbed and scared too.
And then we start seeing clips from his lives where he's mentioning Nick, and he even mentions Angel and makes some, seeming threats like, things are going to go down. He just doesn't seemingly appear to be in his right mind.
So Angel is obviously freaking out, and she's scared she's going to hurt somebody. So she tells Nick what she heard, and Nick files a restraining order for him, Lauren, his son, and his parents-in-law. And I just feel a lot of compassion for Angel and Nick in this moment, because they're trying to protect themselves, but also they're trying to protect their brother. It seems like they thought that filing this restraining order would be sort of a wake-up call for Aaron, that like, this is how serious it's getting. Like, we're taking legal action so that you will stay away from us until you get help. But it seemed to have an adverse effect, and it spiraled Aaron even further and made him even more prone to these like violent seeming angry outbursts.
And right now, like, this restraining order was filed, but until it's issued, they can't actually get any of the weapons taken away. So they're in this like waiting limbo period right now.
So Aaron is like kind of unhinged, and they're like tracking him and where he is. And they see that he is driving to Vegas they know that he has a gun in the car with him. So they're tracking him. And this whole scene is just like so unbelievable. They're like watching his little dot get closer and closer to Nick's home. And he ends up across the street from Nick's house, like the gated community that Nick lives in.
And they have like seeming like screenshot text messages, like, where is he now? Where is he now? Like, it's like a frantic conversation trying to figure out what he's doing and why he's going that way, because, you know, Aaron's supposed to be going to Kentucky for a show. So he's supposed to be going in the complete opposite direction. So just seeing him kind of do that 180 turn and head straight to Vegas with, you know, weapons, obviously is a very frantic, scary moment.
So I think it's Lori who is telling this part of the story now. And she's saying, you know, Lauren is 8 months pregnant at the time. Lori and everyone is freaking out. Like, they don't know what's going on. Lori said like she could hear people screaming and being angry and like just not knowing what to do. Like, this is an armed person who has said that he wants to hurt them. So everyone is just freaking out. It ends up that Aaron just sits in a parking lot for 45 minutes and leaves and goes back to Kentucky. But like, that is so terrifying and so heartbreaking. So Angel says that the last time she saw Aaron was in a courtroom when they were trying to get the guns taken away. And she said that she just didn't even recognize him. He was so angry and he was screaming at her like, "You're dead to me." And she said that at this point he was just like too far gone to come back.
Another just like she's choked up, like just devastating memory and moment for her.
There's so many upsetting things in this documentary, like the footage that they have, because it was so well documented. Like, a lot of people had like a front row seat to his like descendants into like his death. And it's just so sad that there was nothing you could do but like watch it happen. And we see Jane and Aaron on FaceTime, and Jane is, you know, back to this narrative that Jane was putting a wedge between Nick and Aaron. She's like stoking the flame, saying that he doesn't want you to be any more famous than him, like just making Aaron more and more angry with Nick.
Again, like the shit she's been doing for years, allegedly.
And so we see Angel again, and she's saying all anybody wants is for Aaron to get healthy, you know? And Lori, I think, comes in and says, you know, but the people he hurt the most are the people who loved him the most and are the ones who tried to help him. And they did try to get him in a 5150 just to like get his head clear, you know, just to try to get him sober, and then maybe they could get him back on track.
I just wonder, like, with all the evidence and stuff on social media, recorded, et cetera, like how they couldn't get him in a 5150. Like, he's literally making death threats, but they got Britney Spears in 2 5150s. Like, that doesn't math to me.
And Britney wasn't out here acquiring guns
or threatening death on people.
It's actually so sickening the way that women are treated when they're in distress versus men.
Right.
Because we're just used to men being angry all the time. So people were apparently like always calling the cops to Aaron's house for these welfare checks. I guess fans and of course their family members would be calling, and it just showed this manipulative side to Aaron. He knew exactly how to answer all the questions. You know, he knew exactly what to say to the officers to make it seem like he was okay and fine. And at this point, we learn that Aaron becomes a father. And I thought it was kind of interesting. They don't talk about, you know, who Aaron was dating at that time or anything. Yeah, they didn't mention Melanie by name at all. But I thought that was
she was invited to the premiere.
That's good. I thought that was kind of strange to not even include her in the interviews. She obviously was close to him. Like, they had a son together. Maybe she declined. I don't know what the background is there, but I just thought it was interesting that they didn't include her perspective. So and the way that they also said, like, Aaron became a father. Like, I don't know. It just didn't seem
weird. It wasn't like a natural, just didn't seem normal.
Right. It wasn't like, oh, he was dating this woman and they had a baby together. Like, it just felt very kind of
Odd.
matter of fact.
Yeah.
So his son Prince is born, and very sadly, but probably not surprisingly, he lost custody within, months. His son was 10 months old in like the headline that they showed. And after that, Aaron goes to rehab for the 5th time. And it's at this time that Angel says she reconnected with Aaron. But Aaron is just like adamant. He kept telling Angel, there's nothing you can do. It's his decision to take the pills. And quote, Aaron is going to do what Aaron wants to do.
This is a tale as old as time, though. Like, you literally cannot help people who do not want to be helped themselves, who don't want to pull themselves out of this. Like, they literally tried so much and so hard with him. Like, I can't imagine how extremely difficult and draining that was. And it just still wasn't enough because Aaron didn't want it. And that's the person who matters. Like, he told Angel that Aaron, pre-drugs, that Aaron, he's dead. Like, what a terrible thing to hear your twin brothers say.
Oh my God. And this was, I think, like the hardest part to watch. Like, they showed footage of him clearly being high on these like duster cans, which I had to Google. I didn't know what that was. That people like use that as drugs. And I'm probably gonna get flagged for something because I was like, what are duster cans? Like, what does that do? But they're showing footage of him like doing it on lives, like on TikTok and stuff. And just to see someone you love, just to see anyone in a state like that. I mean, it was devastating. I felt like sick to my stomach watching it.
You can hear the noise. You can see him falling asleep. It was just so hard to watch.
So imagine like your sister watching that happen. So Angel obviously calls him and she's like, what are you doing? Like, stop.
Yeah.
Like, you're clearly like getting high on these lives. Like, why? And he's just in full denial. He says he's fine. He says he was just falling asleep. And then he turns it on Angel and blames him for his addiction and says the family, makes him the scapegoat. And they end the conversation saying that they want to see each other again. Angel agrees, like, I want to see you too, but it needs to be with a therapist. We need someone to be able to mediate, this conversation.
So that was a Wednesday, just to get a sense of the timeline. And, Angel ended the conversation. She admitted, understandably, feeling like frustrated at that point, that he's shifting that blame. He wasn't owning his part in his own addiction and what was going on. So, she's like, I had to get off the phone. I was just like, okay, we can do this. I love you. Goodbye. That type of thing.
So now it's Saturday and Angel gets the phone call that she probably knew she was going to get one day. And it's so sad the way they set this up. She was like, me and my husband were dancing with my daughter in the bathroom. And then she gets a phone call and her husband is sharing his POV and she runs downstairs and I'm like tearing up and she just starts screaming. And, her husband, he was like, I didn't need to hear anything else. Like, I just knew exactly what it was. And we hear where Nick was when he found out. He was in London. He found out over a text message.
I remember a lot of people were not sure if the show in London would go on that evening. There was a lot of uncertainty.
And the Backstreet Boys had a show in London that night. And, Nick is in tears and he's just saying, it's unbelievable to this day. And he still hasn't really had a chance to fully grieve it.
This is a very difficult, sequence to watch. Like you said, Kelsey, it's just, this family has experienced so much pain and loss.
So we get Scout on our screen again, which we love Scout. By this point, we feel like we know her. And, she goes on to say that she didn't know him very well, but he was so much a part of her and a part of her story. And I think any fan of anyone can so relate to this. Like, no, we don't know these people personally, but they were the soundtrack to our lives. We had crushes on them, or we listened to their music during pivotal times in our lives. And her inclusion in this, I said it before, I'll say it again. It just felt like the fan perspective. And I thought it was really touching and a really nice inclusion.
I remember when I remember where I was when I heard, and just feeling so devastating and having trouble letting it go. Like, I hurt for Nick and Angel and just knowing how this must be for them. And similarly to what Scout mentioned, I grieved for the life and childhood that that Aaron lost. Like, he was clearly just looking for love and attention, and said multiple times that he was just heartbroken. And just thinking about how wrong it all went, it's just, an unspeakable tragedy.
Yeah, it still is just striking to me who they decided to have interviewed as part of this. There weren't close friends of Aaron. It's his tour manager, his siblings, two celebrities who knew him tangentially. I just feel like that was also a way of showing us and not just telling us that he just didn't have close friends that were probably a good influence on his life, and just speaks to the loneliness that he was suffering from above everything else.
I've also heard some speculation that around, the last couple of years of his life, he didn't have a lot of good people around him. If that makes sense, like there might have been some enabling going on. Again, this is just things that I've heard and speculation, but it may speak to that a bit. Angel, said how she hoped that Aaron's death, the tragedy of Aaron's death, would be just such a wake-up call for BJ, their other sister, who was also, she was going through it with her addiction at this time, and Angel did not realize, how bad it was. And apparently BJ was very good at hiding addiction, and she was someone who did not want help, according to Angel.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So again, we see text messages between the sisters, and it's just so sad. Like, I feel like Angel is like, obviously this documentary is all told from her perspective, and it's Angel's story. It's how Angel perceived their childhood and what her perspective and experience was losing these three siblings. She's just like screaming into the void, like, get therapy, like, I can help you. And it's just so frustrating and sad and just devastating. And we see these texts, and she's basically saying, like, BJ, I'm seeing all the really disturbing things that you're saying, and it's really upsetting to me. And BJ basically just says, sorry, but I just want to be prepared. And not long after, BJ passed away of an overdose. And, Corey, Angel's husband, is like, okay, so here's the third Christmas that, my wife is grieving a sibling who's lost too soon. It's so sad.
And it's just unimaginable. But to Angel's strength, apparently BJ asked her to share her story, and Angel promised she would. And she revealed that BJ always felt like the black sheep of the family, and that no one cared about her. And I just would imagine this would be really a difficult undertaking and a difficult story to share. But Angel has done it with such grace and with such bravery.
Mm-hmm, totally. And, she says this documentary was a chance for her to tell the truth. And, her truth, this was her recollection of their childhood. And it is just striking to me how they were all dealt such similar hands, and how differently things can turn out when there's intervention. Angel got help, and like, how different could this have been if the others had done the same or had those more stable parent figures to look up to. So she says that, she always wants her siblings to be remembered because they deserve that. And then we see Nick and Angel connecting again, and Nick says, we're the only ones left. And that just like, it's so sad. The oldest and the youngest. And, Nick is talking about how he wants to break this generational cycle. He says he doesn't want the dysfunction that they grew up with to affect his children or Angel's children. And, that their siblings did not deserve the life that they got. And this is where Nick shares that he feels guilty that all of this was his own fault, because it was his fame and his success that started it all, in his words. And his siblings were left to be abandoned. So Nick is also describing how difficult it was when he was on the outside, looking in and traveling, and he would see things happening to his siblings and other people, but he couldn't really help because he was somewhere else. He was on tour with Backstreet Boys. He was doing his own thing. And he describes this feeling of wanting to, quote, scoop them up. And, he would try to intervene, but his siblings were little kids. They couldn't just leave their homes. They needed to be with their parents. And, there's a sweet moment. They say they're proud of each other. And it's just really sad.
I feel like some documentaries, you can get these kind of conversations that they do for the camera. But this felt, like a genuine, heartfelt conversation to me.
Totally. So we end with Nick performing Hurts to Love You at one of his solo shows, and he dedicates it to Angel, who was in the audience. And, there's this montage of them all as little babies in happier times. We see Aaron with his son and Nick with his own kids and Angel, at her wedding, all these happy memories. And by now I'm a puddle on the floor in my viewing.
We also see Prince at the premiere, and he just is Aaron's twin. He has Aaron's hair. Like, I just cannot not see young Aaron and Prince. But what a documentary. Just to wrap up with some of our commentary and critique, I thought this documentary was very well done. Just having Angel behind it, and Nick's involvement. Now it's not people like talking about them telling their story, the Carter story, but we're finally getting it from her mouth, from their mouth, their version of events. And I think that's really powerful. And I just thought it was interesting. You can just tell how emotionally and intelligent Angel is and how much therapy and work she has put in to get to the other side of what seems to be like, obviously generational trauma. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is a story about like Angel's resilience, like that was kind of the takeaway that I had. Like what happens when you seek help and are try to break that cycle, knowingly. And I think it's worth noting that she and Nick set up a donation fund after Aaron's death to honor Sleeves, which is a children's mental health organization which helps families across America. I mean, she clearly has found a passion in this, which is probably not her own choice. This probably isn't something that she wants to advocate for, but, she's doing the best she can with the hand that she was dealt. And I think that's really powerful. And yeah, I mean, I feel like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, like having this choices of having Melissa Joan Hart, a child star, and Soleil Moon Frye, who was also a child star, like showing the dark side of what it's like when kids work.
Yeah.
Which was undoubtedly a huge element in this. And I was reading a bunch of coverage around the documentary. I was just curious, like, what else do we not know about it? And she told Washington Post that what she remembers about a young Aaron Carter is he had this like really bright, bubbly personality, but, he was only 13 years old when he was on a 2001 episode of Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And Soleil Moon Frye was Sabrina's college roommate. That's who she played in the show. She recalled that she was struck by how vivacious and full of life he seemed to be, but how, it really couldn't have been easy growing up in the spotlight, let alone as, the younger brother of a Backstreet Boy. So she herself had a personal connection to him, which I think also shows why she handled it with so much compassion and care.
I also think it's just relevant, like being probably the younger brother of a Backstreet Boy, I'm sure got him in many doors, but it was just something he seemed to struggle with and want to shake and maybe not be able to shake, for his entire career. So it's like a double-edged sword almost.
So that's our commentary and critique. There's a lot of praising of the documentary out there, some really positive reviews, but there's also some critique from articles and outlets like Time, for example. They said that, there's some really great intentions here with this documentary, raising awareness around mental health, generational trauma, addiction, but that it does leave out a lot of things that we've all seen in the news. There's new accusations against Nick. There's the Fallen Idols documentary. And this article in Time, at least, claims that, this documentary didn't need to take a position on all of this, but they argue that it should have at least been acknowledged, but that it's understandable that Nick's youngest sister, wouldn't want a documentary coming from her perspective to validate any of these accusations. But they argue that it's an elephant in the room and it's a really tricky one to ignore. Well, we know this was a really heavy episode. Thank you for listening if you made it this far. And let us know your thoughts. If you watched it too, DM us at When They Popped Pod. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Bye.